Okay, I think we can start now. Yes, welcome again to the last keynote lecture. Will be delivered by my friend and colleague György, Professor Majtényi, György Majtényi. We are from the same university, Eszterházy, Károly Eszterházy University, now a Catholic University. But let me introduce Professor Majtényi. He's a social historian and a professor at the Department of History and also the Doctoral School of History at our university, Károly Eszterházy Catholic University in Eger here in Hungary. For 10 years, he was the department head as well of the National Archives of Hungary, and her research interests cover post-war social history of Hungary and Eastern and Central Europe. He is also interested in social history of football, Roma social history, intellectual history, and recently he's been doing research on state social concerns, and numerous articles he has published and 6 monographs so far. The last one, the latest one, titled Villas, Hunts and Soccer Games, Luxury and the Ruling Elite in Socialist Hungary, was published with Indiana University Press is 2021. He acquired habilitation and PhD, obviously, and completed several research projects in Austria, Finland, Germany, Hungary, Slovakia, and the United States, thanks to various research grants. And as a visiting scholar and professor, he taught at several universities in Eastern and Central Europe. So, György, Professor Majtényi, you are welcome to give our lectures titled, and that's your task now.
Thank you. Thank you, Eva, for these kind words, and thank you for the invitation and also for the possibility to give here a keynote presentation on communist utopia and luxury communism. So this is the title of my presentation. And due to the limited time available, so I will read out the text of my presentation. Okay, so in his memoir, Philip Meran, The Scion of a Family of Counts, reports on an emblematic event of 1946, the birthday of the Csák-Bérény party secretary. I quote, "On a long table, there was roasted pork, caviar, turkey, and also wild boar, roasted pheasant, and stuffed goose. From crystal pitchers, they poured the strong Meran wine that had been confiscated from our Csókakő and Orond vineyards. These are ladies present, some attractive and dressed according to the new fashion. The hostess is also elegant and beautiful." End of quotation. Meran's description of the party also mentions the host. I quote, "The party leader turned 40 today. He's in high spirits and he's a rather likable character." End of quotation. The snapshot, which offers a rather idyllic depiction, demonstrates that there were interactions between the old and new elites in post-Second World War Hungary. Obviously, one can also envision the meeting of their two ways of life in the dynamics of cultural and social processes through which elements of a new lifestyle flow into the old one, transforming, absorbing, and overwriting old patterns of behavior. Presumably, much as some of the customs and habits of given individual did not disappear with the change of regime and the rise of the socialist system, the customs and habits of whole social groups also did not simply vanish without a trace. Lifestyles changed only slowly. People's habits and mentalities cannot be transformed from one day to the next. Just to mention one example, according to the recollections of one of their late descendants, member of the Zsolnay family is a traditional bourgeois family, entrepreneur family that owned and ran a ceramics factory of worldwide fame. So the members of the Zsolnay family would never have stooped to serving a meal out of a saucepan at the dinner table, even when out of necessity, the head of the family was forced to work at the Nagytétény rubber factory, making condoms during the 1950s, during Hungarian socialism. state socialism. While the old social circles cultivated their traditions, new people and new groups were tending to follow or adopt the old consumer habits. One of my intentions in my book, which mentioned Éva, on the socialist ruling elite in Hungary, published at the Indiana University Press, was to examine the similarity and analogy, new directions and continuity, the habits of the new elite that emerged after the Second World War, and the perpetuation and dissolution of the lifestyle of the traditional aristocracy and elite. I use the term ruling elite to denote a particular group distinguished by its privileges and its ruling position, a group whose lifestyle was characterized by the exploitation to the greatest extent possible of the prevailing power relations. Of course, the very existence of a narrow privileged elite was at odds with the regime's official communist ideology and the communist utopia, which proclaimed equality and the power of the working class. The social sciences have traditionally attributed to the elites of a given era a significant role in the formation of the social phenomena. Recognition of the importance of this role may deepen our understanding of the everyday lives of socialist elites. However, this role derives not from the inventive, cultivated, or distinguished nature of the group, but from its dominant position, or from the fact that it controls the majority of resources. Due to the privileged positions, the elites of any era set an example for the society as a whole through the distinctive customs and lifestyles they adopt. Social scientists have offered various theories explaining how the customs of the elite spread across society. Many see the spread of these customs as a process that can be likened to the rise and fall of waves that break and then smooth over, becoming one with the waters again, but also transforming the shore. Gabriel Tard contends that waves of change always begin with the elite. According to the so-called trickle-down theory, when higher social groups establish new patterns, they pass down, as it were, the old patterns to the lower classes. Georg Simmel, for example, used this metaphor to describe the dynamics of society when observing phenomena in the field of fashion. From a different perspective, the cause and effect relation is reversed. If other social groups follow the traditions of the elite, then the elite is compelled to introduce new changes in order to distinguish itself from the majority. The behavioral patterns and traditions set by the elite thus gradually diffuse. As soon as these patterns and traditions become a palpable part of the spheres inhabited by other social groups, the elite creates new patterns in order to preserve its territory as elite. Herbert Spencer characterized this as a kind of race, an imitation in pursuit, in which social domination is at stake. According to this explanation, various social groups conform directly or indirectly to the consumer patterns created by the elite. This approach, which examines social change from the viewpoint of the elite, suggests that individuals adopt bottom-up consumer patterns, meaning that in their everyday lives, people look at the customs and lifestyles of the upper classes for their models. However, in the study of social history, it might prove more useful not to mystify the social role of the elite, but rather to consider the luxury consumption patterns characteristics of this group from its perspective. From this viewpoint, these consumption patterns appear primarily as acts of social demarcation or symbols of the striving of the elite to separate themselves from the rest of society, because every individual and every social class attempts to acquire the most crucial symbols of social status and belonging. It is not the possession of the distribution of property that matters so much as the meanings attributed to property. In the symbolic spaces of society, consumption serves as a means of separation and self-distinction. In their everyday practices, people can differentiate themselves from other individuals and groups. Within the elite, the individual's capacity to authenticate group membership is at stake, as is the importance of emphasis on the elite as a unique community, differentiated from other social groups. Setting the example to be followed or envied is a daily struggle for the symbolic strengthening of vital social positions and the social legitimization of authority. In everyday life, however, consumption naturally means more than this for individuals. It implies the realization of dreams and illusions, where the material goal is of less importance than the striving to attain the images and fantasy words associated with it. From the perspective of my inquiry, this striving can also be perceived as the effort to create or justify social positions. Luxury consumption is a tool with which members of the elite distinguish themselves and establish a seemingly safe distance from others. Luxury means consumption beyond the necessary, but of course, everyone understands necessity differently. Luxury not only refers to the accumulation and conspicuous use of consumer goods, but also indicates the possession of sophisticated goods that are not available to everyone. Luxury consumer customs and goods in which party leaders indulged could also represent the power differences within the socialist society. The question arises, however, how luxury and consumer ambitions to which it gave a rise could find expression in an ideological and political environment that was hostile, at least in principle, to the very notion of luxury. In all likelihood, the answer lies in individuals' inclinations toward narcissism. As Sennett observes, I quote, "Narcissism sets up the illusion that once has a feeling, it must be manifest because, after all, inside is an absolute reality." The end of quotation. This feeling, presumably, included personal experiences of power and positions of rule. Individuals could thus express that they belonged to the ruling elite. If someone indicated through his lifestyle that he met the expectations of the community, he justified his position in his own eyes and strengthened in the eyes of others. Throughout the socialist era, the complicated system of perks and benefits assured the ruling elites a good living and a comfortable life, and these benefits were signs of their positions of power. András Hegedűs, a former prime minister during socialism in the 1950s, wrote about this, I quote, "Naturally, symbols formed of the prestige of the newly emerged power, and with amazing cunnings, these symbols designated quite precisely an individual's place in the hierarchy. A rise or decline in status was almost immediately followed by a change in the symbols of prestige. The privileges enjoyed by the party leaders were referred to as the 4Ks: the use of car, in Hungarian kocsi, the use of a so-called K-line telephone, travel abroad, in Hungarian külföldi út, and access to the best medical care, which was provided by the Kútvölgyi Hospital. Another version of the 4Ks was in use among everyday people. The 3Ks refer to the following: Kékestető, the highest peak in Hungary, in this case used as a synecdoche for the best vacation sites, the Kútvölgyi Hospital, and the Kerepesi Cemetery, where members of the elite were kept separate from the masses even in death. Some variations included the words kégli and kurva in Hungarian, so or dicks and horse. The cadres received significant allowances beside their high salary, so it became also a financial compulsion for them to keep their positions and advance their career. Of course, these allowances differed according to the status of the functionaries. The primary allowance was the villa allocation. While in the Findeszékkel Hungary, the symbol of luxury was Andrássy Avenue and its neighborhood from the 1930s on Buda Hills, more especially Rózsadomb and Pasarét, counted as the most desirable locations for villa builders and buyers. The elite, as well as the middle class, wanted to create its own comfortable and luxurious environment. Public image was only of secondary importance. There was thus an impetus to build in Rózsadomb and Pasarét. This tradition continued after World War II, when the dominant elite moved to the Buda Hills. The ruling elite moved to the Buda Hills. On the spacious plots in Buda, far from traffic, in the shade of huge old trees, the lifestyle of the new elite could blossom. Rózsadomb and Pasarét were referred as the cadre field in these years. The party and state leaders could exchange their former apartments for luxury villas that were abandoned and or confiscated from the pre-war elite and middle class. In the beginning, these houses were handled by the Commission of Abandoned Properties, it was a special authority in that time. Later, the State Security Authority confiscated and distributed them. Given the ideology of the system, a tradition of villa building could not be created in the 1950s. However, one can look at which houses were chosen by the party leaders among the wide range of nationalized villas. It is interesting that after the war, the more historical styles preserved their popularity against the functionalist and the modern. These buildings with porticos resting on Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian columns, with turrets and wooden pediments, seem to be more elegant, nicer for the party leaders who were not keen on the modern art. Some functionaries did choose modern buildings. For example, Zoltán Vas, the president of the National Planning Office, lived in the early 1950s in the Havas Villa on Hankorczy Street, which was planned by the modernist architect Lajos Kozma. In 1948, Imre Nagy's prime minister's family moved to the Kozma Villa on Orsó Street. According to the archival sources, the Nagy family complemented the original modern furniture of the house with antiques. In addition to an elegant villa apartment with a luxurious interior, the automobile was another important symbol of power in the period. In Hungary, the first car owners had already formed an exclusive society, mostly aristocrats and entrepreneurs, and the prestige of car ownership continued into the communist era. After the Second World War, politicians promised that the automobile would no longer be considered a luxury item, affordable only the rich, but would in fact become accessible to all in socialist Hungary. Despite these promises, car use remained the monopoly of a narrow circle of officials and partymen. The free market for cars ceased, and private use and ownership of cars were restricted to officials of higher rank, or in some cases, scholars, artists, and sportsmen. Starting in the 1960s, however, the image of and demand for automobiles revived in Hungary as more cars became available for the public. In the 1950s, the offices mostly used Skoda and Pobeda cars, which because of their poor constructions quickly deteriorated with ordinary use, by new Western automobiles, Chevrolets and BMWs, which could be bought from the foreign exchange quota of the party and state organs, served the comfort of high-ranking officials. As the mass ownership of cars increased, party leaders shifted their sights to even more luxurious automobiles to secure for themselves what became socialist luxury that further distinguished them from other groups within society. In the Kádár era, Mercedes-Benz cars gained cash and in elite Hungarian circles. From the beginning of the 1970s, the Mercedes 280 became the protocol car. Members of the elite used the car for approximately 3 years, then it was replaced. János Kádár has been considered by public opinion to have been a modest Puritan man. According to the legend, he spooned his favorite food, the semolina noodles, from his kitchen stool in his villa of Rózsadomb. According to much quoted memoirs of his author, the Kádár couple even kept hens in the yard of their house of Rózsadomb in the Buda Hills. However, there was not only a hen house, but also a swimming pool in the garden. We cannot see now what existed across the walls of the villa of Cserja Street either, so we cannot know his everyday customs thoroughly. Nevertheless, it is ascertainable that the party secretary general, the first secretary, enjoyed the benefits following from his position, observed the elite customs and the accompanying protocol. Although he was not an enthusiast about cars and traveled on the representative special train of the period, on the so-called Silver Arrow, whenever he could, if he had to use a car, a bulletproof S-Class Mercedes-Benz would take him wherever he needed to go. The S-Class Mercedes-Benz, symbolizing the ruling elite of the former period, has been aptly referred to as the Kádár Mercedes in Hungary. In the 1950s, the Ministry of Agriculture maintained so-called ministerial hunting reserves where state and party leaders would hunt free of charge. Our archival sources show that prominent leaders of the state party shared a passion for hunting. They included Mátyás Rákosi, János Kádár, as well as Imre Nagy. Their hunts were not restricted by anybody, but even they followed all traditions of hunting. Personal relationship and the confidence that ensues from hunting together has always formed a good part of the hunting experience. In 1963, János Kádár, who was a passionate hunter, decided to make hunting more organized and regulated. He instructed the corresponding head of the Ministry of Agriculture to work out the hunting protocol for the state and party leaders. The hunting society of the party leaders was called Concord, and it was funded on the basis of that protocol. So here you can see the funding members of the Concord Hunting Society. So-called primary game preserve territories were formed for the members of the Concord. There were originally 18 funding members, and by 1974, 60 members could enjoy the privileges provided by the Concord Hunting Society. A closing dinner, usually in the Officers' Club in Budapest, was held each year, at which time the members of the club received new issues from the satirical journal Facán Matyi, prepared exclusively for them by the caricaturist of the popular satirical journal of the period, Ludas Matyi, which treated events in the life of the club. During these dinners, comedians and actors were also invited to enliven the club members. They performed parodies and variety shows. Shared lifestyles and customs, however, did serve also as a cohesive force that formed a unified community of the representatives of various strands within the party, even though the members of the party came from diverse backgrounds. Certain attitudes and ways of life were equally characteristic of Mátyás Rákosi, János Kádár, and Imre Nagy. The shared nature of these traditions can be interpreted as a manifestation of formally undeclared identity, acknowledged but evidently real, and this identity helped them adapt more quickly and easily to their new roles as statesmen, their new social standing, and the community of the contemporary ruling elite to which they belonged. One could paraphrase Oscar Wilde, who claimed that the true mystery of life is hidden not in the invisible, but in the visible. Kádár found the pre-Second World War world to which they had access through their position and the perpetuation of protocol much more comprehensible than the utopia of communism. And the spaces and times representing power, Cadres saw a world that captured them in his toe like a whirlpool. The behavioral patterns displayed by individual members of the elite were of key importance. While customs associated with the elite during the 1950s indicated the position someone had reached and the power she or he had acquired, later they became a cohesive force and a kind of common law. Naturally, members of the elite formulated their own style, each according to his or her own personality and the role consciously taken within the group. In general, there was no ideology or social identity that would or could have strengthened the sense of belonging to an elite and privileged community for party leaders. The ideology of the regime and the fact that the elite was the representative of the worker state may have given rise to a sort of working class consciousness and identity among the party functionaries, but this served more as a reference point than a cohesive force. Indeed, within the elite, fissures emerged along the fault lines of the old traditional identities. If perhaps with shifting meanings and to different extents, the form of conduct and behavior that are prescribed by society characterize the ruling groups and power elites of different eras, and it sometimes can seem as if they are intertwined in ways that depend neither on time nor on place. Elements of behavior that are passed on as tradition do not simply determine and hold together social groups. They also recreate these social groups as time passes. The ruling elite of the socialist era took form in a collision zone, symbolic place, on the border of opposing cultures and eras. With its mere existence, this borderland, in addition to being a symbolic battleground, created a link between the two eras and dissolved some of the tensions. In their creation of traditions that passed to subsequent generations, the party leaders played a role as a kind of lifestyle intermediary. Like a dry sponge, they absorbed everything they could of the old traditions and thus became both trustees and even representatives of the traditions of the Hort era, of the pre-war era. Beginning in the 1970s, members of increasingly affluent social groups who in terms of their wealth were closing in on the elite began to adopt the customs and lifestyles of the ruling elite. In examining society in socialist Hungary, the existence of the ruling elite symbolized both socialist power and the presence of the dictatorship. But through the privileges this ruling elite enjoyed, it also became a distinctive group with a distinctive lifestyle. It thus became a community separate from other groups in the larger society and therefore acquired clear social boundaries. The lifestyle of this elite constituted a distinctive point of comparison and orientation for the other groups of socialist society, and not only in terms of the relationship to power, but also in the sphere of consumer habits. The ruling elite focused less on protecting the system and using force to ensure its own access to power, and more on maintaining control of consumption and defending its own consumer interests. Gradually, its alleged identity as an agent and embodiment of revolution began to fray. Beneath the wheel of socialist ideology, the members of the elite strove increasingly to maintain oversight over consumer habits and to shape these habits to meet their demands. And in the meantime, they too adapted. For the elite, these goods were more tangible than the utopia of communism. There was a joke in Hungary at the time that wittily described the contradiction for a system that proclaimed the power of the working class. It went like this: in Hungary, cognac is the drink of the working class, but can only be consumed by the working class through its representatives. Philip Meran, whose memoir I cited in the beginning, does not fear mention in his memoir, the accordionist at the Csák-Berény birthday reception, who played a revisionist song titled "Prague is not far from the border." Andy, the accordionist, first played for József Mindszenty, Archbishop of Esztergom and the Catholic Prelate of Hungary, and later for Mátyás Rákosi, Secretary General of the Communist Party, much to the delight of both. In 1946, there was also Concord in the Csák-Berény Chateau. Guests were singing exclusively revisionist songs in unison to the music played by the accordionist Andy. As people began to feel increasingly festive, they stuck money to Andy's forehead with saliva. Andy left the building and handed the money over to the drivers. The memoir does not mention whether he complained to them about the unusual behavior of the mayor's new guest, the party secretary. When bidding farewell, the regional party secretary, the Soviet officers, and the host saw the Meran brothers out. Upon leaving, the counts threw a last glance at the old building. I quote from the memoir: "In the dark, the manor house looks like it did in the old days." End of quotation. In this presentation, I endeavored to gaze through the windows of the imaginary manor house in which Hungarian party leaders first learned traditional patterns of behavior and then tried to create new ones. Thank you for the attention.
They were building a utopia for the working class, but in fact,
Sorry. I cannot hear.
So of course the Hungarian leadership was pretending they were building the utopia for the working class. In the meantime, they were building a cornucopia for themselves. So that we know through their representatives. The funniest thing for me as an outsider of this story is that the intricacies of the irony and self-irony permitted by the party and offered to themselves through the use of this ludosmaki metaphor, which is of course a popular character in Hungarian culture.
Yes.
Somebody who is taking care of geese. So the ludosmaki becomes pazan, pheasant maki, because he's going to, and it is the intricacy of this, I would say, almost perverse game with innuendos and allusions and so forth that is absolutely, to me, sadistic, and probably to everybody in Hungary rings the same bell. But now the question is, what happened to the sons and daughters of these beneficiaries? Because we know fantastic examples such as Rudolf Slansky. They were hunting each other themselves, the real ruling elite, right? So Slansky is one of those who fell victim after going hunting. He was hunting down. But his son, also Rudolf Slansky, we know about him. And here, closer to Hungary, it is Laszlo Rojk, who was hunted down by the comrades and whose son lived long enough to stay in the same apartment on Ondrasy Avenue as his family. And I think what happened to this transmission of property as opposed to the restitution of property to the original users after 1990?
So, Thank you for the question. So we know quite a lot about the history of these properties and also on the aftermath of these properties. And there are such families which could keep these properties also after the change of regime. And we can read a lot about this in the extreme right-wing newspapers as well. So for me, it's much more interesting how the tensions were between the different generations of these families, and a lot of new generations of these families denied this tradition and also moved out from these properties and started started a new life in other fields of social life, not in politics. These caricatures which you mentioned are from this Peasant Matyi satirical journal, and it was made exclusively for the party leaders, and no one beside the party leaders could read this satirical journal. And I received pieces from this satirical journal from a hunter who organized these huntings for the party leaders. And it was also new for me when I found them.
Thank you very much. I have a question concerning the more theoretical aspects of your talk. I understand you said that the elite always sets an example to the common people, and I recognize that here's a large tension, because then the less affluent people just don't have the material means to follow these examples. But an even more interesting question, and that's very interestingly resonates with a recent book of Professor Clay's, luxury, and that luxury is also a way of overconsumption, and it's one of the major causes of the present crisis. So, do you think there is a way of either changing these patterns or making less dangerous, less overconsumptive consumption patterns to make the prestige symbols, or somehow is there a way of changing this dynamics that the elites drive the large parts of the society into overconsumption?
So it's a very fascinating question. So I also wrote a book about the history of hunting in Hungary and how hunting existed as a social tradition of the elite, social and cultural tradition. And in this book, I try to investigate the relationship between the pre-war and post-war hunters, and also I wrote a chapter about that, what happened to this tradition after the regime change, and it seems so that there is a very strong continuity in this tradition, and also the prevailing elites after the regime change continued this tradition, and they also used the same hunting lodges, the same hunters organized their huntings, and they followed also this elite tradition, which can represent the lifestyle, also the communist elite and also the elite of the Hort era. So it seems so sometimes that these elite traditions, these customs and consumer goods can very strongly influence the way of life of these elite groups. independently from the ideology of the given regimes.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. The fact that you mentioned the satirical journal prompts this question about what's the status of the media in the 60s and 70s. You mentioned that these are journals which caricaturists are sort of creating specifically for party leaders.
Yes.
It makes me wonder if there are caricaturists, cartoonists who are also working, in general, like are they also working in newspapers or magazines which are more accessible to the masses, to public at large? Since I myself work on political cartooning in the Indian context, I'm interested in understanding what kind of, let's say, surveillance or what kind of management of the media takes place in the 60s and 70s, Hungary.
Yeah, so as it was mentioned, and as I mentioned, the satirical journal was prepared exclusively for the party leaders, and it was made by the caricaturist of the most popular satirical journal of the time, György Majtényi. And it was a top secret publication. So the satirical journal, Fatszám Matyi, Fezen Matyi, only the party leaders could receive it. And the public opinion theoretically could not know anything about the huntings of the party leaders. And so I wanted to. So, for example, it's an article of a Hungarian newspaper from the era, Esti Hírlap, and in the Fatszám Matyi, this caricaturist republished news from the Esti Hírlap. And in this republished article, Fatszám Matyi revealed the secret of the two unknown hunters about whose records the newspapers wrote. And these two hunters were the two deputy prime minister of the Hungarian government. So the party leaders and of course the media of the era kept secret these habits and these customs of the party leaders, because they were very different from the ideology of the system, the regime.
This is just a comment that so luxury is a term that we should understood, and I mean we should understand in comparative terms, because many of the pictures you show, it doesn't strike as particularly luxurious, right? So most of the villas they had were quite shabby or run down. Or something that seeing them today, you wouldn't consider them as higher than higher middle class, or so that's so I don't know if your research looks at this aspect, that how a socialist version of luxury would compare to a non-socialist. I mean, look at this. So and previously the one when it was under renovation. So it's not, it's not a big deal, right? So, but obviously back then it was considered something luxurious. So I was just wondering if you look at the concept of luxury and the relativity of its perception in your research. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you very much for the comment. So I think in the context of the era, these villas, for example, can be described as luxury villas. So also the paintings which hang on the wall of these villas were painted by the most famous Hungarian painters. For example, in this villa, in the Kádár villa, so there was no portrait on Marx and Engels and Lenin, but there were paintings from József Egri, István Szőnyi, and other very famous Hungarian painters, and also the furnitures were very so very expensive neo-Baroque furnitures, and also the villa before the renovations seemed to be a luxury villa for two persons who lived there with a chauffeur and with an au pair. So they also, so János Kádár in the Hungarian propaganda was regarded, and also his memory shows him as a Puritan, modest man who did not benefited from his position. But if we have a look at his personal customs and habits and how he lived in his everyday life, so he also used the same benefits as other party leaders. He received a villa from the party state. He used the best hunting territories. He traveled with a Mercedes-Benz car, which was not available for the ordinary people. And for example, Mercedes car was absolutely a luxury item also in the 1960s in Hungary. So there is a funny story about that. When Hungary lost the World Cup final in soccer against Germany, then the Hungarian party state bought the first Mercedes cars, and the ordinary people thought that the party leaders sold a game for Mercedes-Benz cars, and it was also a typical story about that, how the ordinary people thought about the elite, and also about the customs of the elite. So these customs also seem to be luxury in the eyes of the public opinion, and they very well described their social positions in the eyes of the society as well. So I think in the context of the contemporary society, this can be regarded as luxury items, as luxury goods.
May I add a personal memory? The villa, Kádár's villa, probably doesn't look so luxurious compared to what Donald Trump today has, or what Ceausescu had in the neighboring country. So Kádár had, there was some modesty in it. Nevertheless, it's in the best part of the city with an incredibly huge garden. The way I know it is that there's a children's hospital next to it, where in the 80s I had asthma, and I spent 2 weeks. And we were playing in the garden, and when we got close to the Kádár villa, I was like 7 or 8, so I didn't know what happened. Immediately guards appeared. So we were not allowed to get close. Nevertheless, I can also confirm there was another legend that the wife of Kádár, who was a simple peasant woman, had chicken in the garden of this huge villa.
Yes,
I saw the
I
chicken.
mentioned it. Yes. Yes. Okay. So thank you, George, for this information. So if I continue the research, I will make an oral history interview with you as well.
Thank you, and thank you for mentioning Mrs. Kádár, because I wanted to ask about the role of women. And not too many women hunters you've shown, probably one I've just picked. So, and if you just go back to the Concord Hunting Society, obviously there are only men. So I just wanted to ask you about the role. Yeah, there's one lady over there. Because you said that he or she,
I have a caricature about the Nimrod ladies. So it was so that first also the party leaders' wives participated in the huntings, and János Kádár asked the representative of the agricultural department of the hunting department of the agricultural ministry to fund a new hunting club for the women, and the so-called Nimrod ladies hunting society was funded for the women, and so there was a masculine hunting group for the men and a hunting society for the women as well. And it's fascinating or interesting that also a so-called young Nimrod hunting society was founded for the children of the party leaders. And later, after the change of regime, a few of the children of the party leaders became Africa hunters. So the first Africa hunters from Hungary, after the regime change, came from this circle.
Thanks so much, firstly, for extremely interesting talk, which really stimulated me a great deal. What I want to ask about is as to whether there was in Hungary a kind of dialectical parallel to this, which actually emphasizes a much more ascetic and Spartan opposition to luxury consumption. I'm thinking of the parallel with Bolshevism, of course, through the revolutionary period into at least the late 20s, when consumer goods began to be played up much more. And in particular, the youth movement, the Komsomols, who were encouraged, of course, to live in common, to dress plainly, simply, not to swear, not to have sex outside marriage, and so on. Completely different ethos presented to the public, because this pattern of consumption, of course, could not be globalized within the society at all. So it had to be kept completely under wraps. So do these two strands run parallel? Also in Hungary, the elites, luxury consumption, but the propagation of an ideal of self-denial, a higher revolutionary type.
Thank you for the comment and the question. So exactly not, but it would be worth mentioning that not only the party leaders and the elite of the era interpreted the system from its viewpoint, from its perspective, but also the ordinary people. And it is worth citing Sheila Fitzpatrick, according to whom the socialist system naturally did not realize the vision of a state in which the working class was empowered through the individuals whom the system gave opportunities for social advancement, did in fact see it from their perspective as such a state. So there were very many personal interpretations of this worker state, and everybody in the framework of his personal life and in his ordinary life could perceive very differently the social reality of state socialism. So, general.
Some more minutes still before the lunch. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.